problem of divine hiddenness. The problem of divine hiddenness is an argument, or family of arguments, against the existence of God, which appeals to facts regarding certain forms of non-belief that exist in the actual world. The most popular form of the argument from divine hiddenness was crafted by Canadian philosopher J. L. Schellenberg. In this video, I will present a brief version of that argument. Conditional in form, the first premise reads, if a perfectly loving God exists, there exists a God who is always open to a personal relationship with any finite person. Theism posits an all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly loving God. But here we should ask what it would mean for a being to be perfectly loving. What kinds of things would perfect love ensure? If we were to ask enough people, there would of course be disagreement on the exact details, but that does not mean that nothing can be said of the topic. What does seem clear about our concept of love is that love is relational and self-giving. Love goes beyond mere benevolence and toward a desire to be personally related and involved with another for its own sake. Of course, loving persons will also be open to personal relationship with those they love because of the various ways in which the well-being of those persons may stand to benefit from such a relationship. The phrase personal relationship here need not be thought of as anything too mysterious or vague. It can be taken to mean what we all assume it to mean: a relationship between at least two persons capable of interacting in a conscious and meaningful way. The use of the word open here doesn't have to suggest anything other than not being closed to such a relationship. So insofar as one is not themselves positively resisting or preventing such a relationship from taking place, they qualify as being open to such a relationship. Stating that a perfectly loving God would always be open to personal relationship with finite persons is merely saying that a perfectly loving God would never do anything herself to close off relationship with finite persons. Schellenberg writes, quote, how could God at some time count as loving John or Joan as fully and richly as God can, if God at that time is preventing John or Joan from being able to participate in any way in a meaningful, conscious relationship with God? Premise 2. If there exists a God who is always open to a personal relationship with any finite person, then no finite person is ever non-resistantly in a state of non-belief in relation to the proposition that God exists. Notice that the consequent from 1 serves as the antecedent for 2. Given that the relationship referred to in premise 1 is the kind of thing which requires both parties to believe each other exists, premise 2 is an essential part of the hiddenness argument. Schellenberg writes, quote, without resistance causing non-belief, a loving God's openness to relationship would be such as to ensure that belief in God was never lost. Notice then that God's perpetual openness to personal relationship with finite persons is logically consistent with some or even all of the potential relationships never actually coming to fruition, or coming to fruition only after some time. Obviously, then, the additional variable relevant here is the openness of the finite persons toward such a relationship. Conscious and meaningful relationships are a two-way street, and so of course the question of whether God will actually have a relationship with any given person cannot be answered just by recognizing that God, if perfectly loving, would surely be open to it. Finite persons are free to shut the door on such an opportunity if they choose. Our second premise, then, establishes a causal connection between any finite person's resistance and their unbelief. As Schellenberg writes, the presence of God will be for them like a light that, however much the degree of its brightness may fluctuate, remains on unless they close their eyes. We then find ourselves at 3, a conclusion which follows inescapably from 1 and 2. Therefore, if a perfectly loving God exists, then no finite person is ever non-resistantly in a state of non-belief in relation to the proposition that God exists. But here's where the problem for theism arises. We are entitled to an additional premise, but this premise directly challenges the consequent of the conclusion we've reached so far in 3, namely 4. Some finite persons are or have been non-resistantly in a state of non-belief in relation to the proposition that God exists. Schellenberg writes, quote, "Anyone with some acquaintance with evolutionary history and a willingness to look the truth in the eye will be able to see that in the actual world many people in our history have failed to believe in God without resistance to God in any way coming into the explanation of their non-belief." And so we come to 5, a conclusion drawn inescapably from 3 and 4. Therefore, no perfectly loving God exists. Books and articles have been written back and forth on the logical subtleties of this argument, but I'm interested in what you think of the argument. It sure seems valid, but is it sound? Are the premises true? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. In future videos, I'll be taking a look at some of the criticisms and the defenses of Schellenberg's hiddenness argument. If you like this video, please click subscribe and share it with your friends on social media. Be sure to like the growing Real Atheology Facebook page. Also, please consider becoming a patron of Real Atheology by contributing even just $1 or $2 per video to help me bring quality atheological content your way. Thanks for watching.